I walked up to the stairs that led to the entrance of the craft. I remember climbing the stairs, how excited I was to finally get to see what's inside the craft. When I got to the top of the stairs, I can clearly see the reversed American flag to my left. The hatchway is fairly small, and I put my hands on both sides of it to bend down to go inside. And when I did, my hand was near the reversed American flag, so I noticed the exact size. It was just a little more than a span, a little more than, as far as my fingers stretched. And I glanced down and looked at the security guard who was staring at me and just kind of gave him a smile and, proceeded into the craft. I was shocked at how sparse the inside of the craft was. Everything was the same color, the same texture, and it all appeared to be the same material. Virtually everything had a radius of curvature to it, and everything looked like it was molded together, with the exception of the reactor. Even though there were 2 tripod lights set up inside the craft, it was still very dark. I've often described the interior of the craft as being very ominous.
I got to look inside, and it had really small chairs, and I think that was the first confirmation I had. That was just a shocking thing, because every time before that I was able to label it, well, this is just a little advance that a group of scientists had formed, and they're keeping it secret, and yeah, we could have built a big disc like that, that's no problem, and we could have adapted these to make it fly, but why does it have little furniture inside, essentially little seats, and now and things began to click together just all too fast.
I was in there with my lab partner, Barry, and there was also another team working elsewhere in the craft. While going over the reactor placement, Barry drew my attention to the archways that all surrounded the interior of the craft, explaining they were hollow and actually waveguides. The waveguide, which terminates as the antenna-looking object from the top, that kind of folds down on itself, so it extends and retracts, and that sits on the top of the reactor that essentially channels the gravity wave up there and into the superstructure around the craft, so it's dispersed evenly. While we were working next to the reactor, I got a really good look at the 3 seats, or what we assumed to be seats, that were far too small to be usable by an adult human. If you look at the seats, what I call the seats, the placement, one of them, the waveguide in reactor, is directly in front of a seat. Why would you ever do that? I mean, either the guy that sits in that seat is on reactor watch and he just sits there and makes sure everything runs but it doesn't make any, and that's the only one that faces directly at the panel that became transparent. While we were working on the reactor, I saw one of the archways become completely transparent, where I could see outside the craft. This immediately caught my attention, and as I focused on it, half that archway turned an opaque blue, and black symbols began to appear on that blue portion of the archway. I had never really seen symbols like that before, but my closest analogy to it would be Korean writing. The symbols themselves were not completely static, they were slowly tilting back and forth. While that archway had my attention, my lab partner Barry whispered my name to me to get my attention back to where it belonged. When I was in the craft and I was kneeling down by the reactor and looked up at the screen, Barry just said, Bob, what are you doing? That's not you. Look down here, which is what broke my attention to go there. But my point was, when he said it, he just kind of whispered it. It's like you're in a library, so there's no loud talking. Hey, Bill, get me, it's just like, so I don't know the reasoning behind that, but yeah, it's like a library. I can see that the craft had been worked on before, and probably for quite some time. One of the amplifiers had been cut out with a plasma cutter. Other teams were working on the skin of the craft, and there were lights extension cords and other equipment that were all over the inside of the craft.
You had noticed that one of the amplifiers had been cut out of the craft.
Yeah.
You said they must have really been sure.
You had to have been 100% confident that you weren't going to ruin the operation of anything if you went to the lengths to remove an entire amplifier out of the craft. Now, look, once you remove that out, the craft can't operate in delta mode anymore, which makes you wonder if they did that intentionally so it couldn't operate in that mode. Kind of the equivalent of clipping a bird's wings, keeping it, so it can't fly away anywhere. Somewhere, someone, and probably certainly more than one person, a group of people agreed that let's go take that out, and they had a damn good reason to do it.